The Shadow of the Beautiful Light, an American epic of invisible poison and unwavering justice. Imagine a secret that killed you slowly, beautifully. A secret kept by men in suits while young women painted their futures onto watch dials, illuminating the path to their own graves. This is not a ghost story, though it is filled with specters. This is the true American story of the Radium Girls, and how a handful of working-class women, cheated, dismissed, and condemned by the very light they created, fought a colossal corporation, and in doing so, forged the bedrock of modern American worker protection and consumer safety. Their battle wasn't against an army or a foreign power. It was against a brilliant, invisible poison and the ruthless corporate machine that treated their lives as expendable. This epic is not just a tragedy. It is the genesis of an extraordinary legal revolution that forever changed the meaning of accountability in the United States. Chapter 1. The Luminous Century. The year is 1917, and America is rushing toward the Great War in Europe. Yet, on the home front, in the quiet, industrial towns of New Jersey and Illinois, a different, quieter revolution is underway. One measured not in miles per hour or tons of steel, but in the ethereal glow of the newly discovered element, radium. Newark, New Jersey, and later Ottawa, Illinois, became the unlikely epicenters of this modern marvel. Here, in brightly lit, humming factories, young women, mostly teenagers and those in their early 20s, were performing a delicate, highly sought-after task, painting watch and instrument dials with a luminous, self-lighting paint. The material was called Undark, and its active ingredient was radium. To the world, radium was a miracle. Discovered by Marie and Pierre Curie, this element represented the ultimate promise of the scientific age. It was 1,000,000 times more radioactive than uranium, a source of endless energy, and, most captivatingly, it glowed with a soft, persistent green-white light that needed no recharging. It was bottled starlight, and in a country obsessed with progress and efficiency, it was invaluable. The war machine demanded instruments that could be read in the pitch black of a cockpit or a trench, and Undark delivered. To the young women who worked for the United States Radium Corporation, USRC, painting those dials was a coveted job. They were known as dial painters, and in the labor market of the day, their position was one of prestige. They earned a handsome wage, far more than a typical factory girl or shop clerk, up to 8 cents per dial, making some of the fastest painters capable of earning well over $100 a week. This was real money, a ticket to independence, stylish clothes, and a contribution to their families that few women their age could match. They were the elite of the female workforce. The work environment itself was, by the standards of the era, pleasant. The USRC facilities were clean, well-lit, and, most importantly, suffused with a magical, fine dust that made the girls feel like sorceresses. They literally glowed. When they left work in the evening, the fine radium powder coated their hair, their skin, and their clothes. They were radiant. They would wear their best dresses, dust sparkling on the velvet, to dance halls, leaving a faint, shimmering halo on the dance floor. They even painted their own teeth and fingernails with the mixture to surprise their boyfriends in the dark. It was the new magic, and they were its beautiful living vessels. The technique for the fine painting was specific, and it was the company's signature instruction, the lip-pointing technique. The brushes were fine camel hair, and to get the perfect sharp point needed for the tiny numbers on the watch dials, the supervisors instructed the girls to place the brush tips between their lips and reshape them with their tongues before dipping them in the paint. Dip, lick, paint. Dip, lick, paint. Every single day, for years, with every tiny unconscious sip, the young women were ingesting microscopic amounts of radium. the corporate scientists and the male executives in the plant knew the dangers. Radium was a tool, and all tools had risks. They understood the science. Radium emits alpha, beta, and gamma radiation. The laboratory chemists who worked with the powdered element used lead screens, tongs, and wore protective masks. The male mixers who prepared the glowing slurry were given lead aprons and strict safety protocols. But the dial painters, the sweet, dedicated girls in the sunlit rooms, they were repeatedly assured that the luminous paint was absolutely harmless. They were told that it was safe, even beneficial, a kind of health tonic. Radium was, after all, being sold in the market in products like Radithor, a radium-infused health water, and in a variety of cosmetics and toothpaste, all touted for their invigorating properties. The company's medical director, an industrial physician named Dr. James C. Meiji, dismissed any health concerns as hysteria. The women, trusting their employers and captivated by the beautiful glow they were paid to create, followed the instructions to the letter. They were dutiful, they were fast, and they were, unbeknownst to them, signing their own death warrants with every lick of the brush. The poison was doing its work with a silent, terrifying efficiency. Radium is a bone seeker. Chemically similar to calcium, when ingested, it bypasses the body's natural defenses and is absorbed directly into the skeleton. Once settled, it begins to emit alpha particles, heavy, localized radiation, like tiny internal machine guns, tearing apart the marrow, the bone structure, and the very DNA of the surrounding cells. The incubation period was cruel. Years of health followed by a sudden, devastating decline. The first signs were innocuous, almost dismissible. A persistent ache in the jaw, a mild chronic anemia, fatigue that went beyond a hard day's work. Then the whispers began. It started with a young woman named Molly Maggia in 1922. Molly was one of the fastest and most cheerful painters at the Newark plant. She began to suffer from a persistent, agonizing toothache. Her dentist, unable to find a simple cavity, pulled the tooth. But the socket did not heal. Instead, it festered. Within weeks, the infection spread, and soon, pieces of her jawbone, necrotic and crumbling, began to come away in her hand. The pain became unbearable. She could no longer open her mouth to speak or eat. When Molly died, the official cause was ruled as syphilis, an attempt by the USRC to malign her character and dismiss the growing number of similar, horrific illnesses among their dial painters. But Molly's fate was just the opening note of a grim, shocking symphony. The beautiful light, they would soon realize, was not starlight. It was the glow of a hidden, terrible fire. And the women of the radium plants were burning from the inside out. The fight for justice and for the right to know what was killing them was about to begin. It would be a battle that pitted a handful of dying, working-class women against the vast wealth and influence of a corporation determined to bury the truth. A battle that would stretch for decades and cost the women everything but their dignity.
Maggia in 1922 was unsettling, But it was just the beginning of a gruesome pattern that the U.S. Radium Corporation, USRC, frantically tried to contain. In the months that followed, other dial painters, all vibrant young women who had shared the camaraderie of the radium room, started to exhibit the same terrifying symptoms. Take Grace Fryer, for example. She had been one of the earliest and most dedicated painters. Grace was forced to quit her job due to an agonizingly painful foot. Doctors, confused by the mysterious ailment, amputated it. But the suffering didn't stop there. More joints swelled, more bone tissue decayed. She was crippled, confined to a chair, watching her youth vanish. Then there was Edna Hussman, known for her beautiful smile. That smile was soon marred by the same insidious decay that had killed Molly. Edna's dentist removed one tooth, then another, but the open sockets refused to close, becoming putrid, chronic infections. Her entire jaw was slowly dissolving, eaten away by the radiation lodged in her very bone structure. The symptoms were so bizarre, so unprecedented, that doctors were utterly baffled. The common diagnosis was often necrotic jaw, a painful condition usually associated with phosphorus poisoning in match factory workers, the infamous Fosse jaw of a previous generation. But that didn't explain the systemic breakdown of the girls' bodies. Since the USRC had deliberately misled the medical community, few physicians connected the dots back to the glowing paint. The corporate cover-up. The USRC's response to the mounting sicknesses was not compassion, but ruthless, calculated denial. The company's executives understood the catastrophic financial implications. Radium was a multi-million-dollar industry. Their stock depended on the public's belief in its safety. If the news broke that their miracle product was killing the workers who handled it, the company would be ruined and a wave of massive liability lawsuits would surely follow. Their strategy was twofold and brutally effective. 1. Medical malpractice and deflection. The USRC hired a team of medical experts, chemists, and dentists, the best money could buy, not to find a cure, but to misdiagnose and deflect. They pressured doctors to attribute the illnesses to everything but radium, from syphilis and poor hygiene to simply poor constitution. Crucially, they funded their own studies that were designed from the start to obscure the connection between the paint and the deaths. Their doctors would examine the girls, give them a clean bill of health, and then secretly report the findings to the USRC's legal team. They preyed on the women's desperation for cash to pay medical bills, buying their silence with pocket change. The girls, young, often poorly educated in science or law, and suffering unimaginable pain, were isolated and easy targets for the corporation's sophisticated legal and medical machinery. The radium test. The turning point came when one scientist, Dr. Harrison Matland, the chief medical examiner for Essex County, New Jersey, refused to accept the company's lies. Matland began conducting autopsies on the deceased dial painters. What he discovered was horrifying. Matland realized that the body was not eliminating the radium, it was depositing it permanently into the bones. Using an early form of radiation detection, he realized the girls were still radioactive after death. He called the condition radium necrosis and radium poisoning. He calculated that the alpha particles, which the USRC claimed were harmless because they couldn't penetrate the skin, were doing their worst damage inside the body. Once ingested, the radium became a constant internal bombardment. In a grim demonstration, Matland discovered that the bones of the dead women were so radioactive that they could expose a photographic plate merely by being placed near them. They literally carried their own fatal internal light. The truth was now scientifically undeniable. The USRC had known about the risks, had actively lied, and had knowingly murdered its employees. The harmless paint was a slow, agonizing executioner. But knowing the truth and proving it in court against one of America's most powerful corporations were two different things. Grace Fryer, increasingly frail, but fueled by a burning sense of injustice, decided she could not die in silence. She was determined to find an attorney to fight for her and her fellow ghost girls. The legal battle for their right to justice and the right to be believed was about to begin.